You might think the question is simple. Why would a man willingly put his mouth on his partner's genitals? But the moment you really sit with it, you realize it isn't just a sex act, it's a psychology test. It asks, can you be present without needing control? Can you give without needing it to be about your own ego? Can you tolerate intimacy that isn't performative? Can you handle vulnerability without turning it into a joke? Because when a man performs oral sex on his female partner, especially in a long-term relationship, he's stepping into one of the most loaded intersections in modern intimacy: pleasure, masculinity, disgust, power, and trust. First, zoom out to something that matters more than opinion. Oral sex is extremely common. In the United States, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention notes that more than 85% of sexually active adults ages 18 to 44 report having had oral sex at least once with an opposite sex partner. That fact matters because it tells you something blunt. This isn't a rare, fringe behavior that requires a unique personality. It's a mainstream part of many couples' sex lives. So the more interesting question becomes, what does it mean psychologically when a man chooses to do it, chooses to keep doing it, and chooses to do it in a culture that still carries weird shame and bravado around women's pleasure? Part of the answer is simply anatomy meeting reality. A lot of heterosexual sex has historically been scripted like a story with one main event, and that main event is penetration. But research on sexual scripts and orgasm expectations keeps pointing to the same uncomfortable truth. When couples follow the default script, women's pleasure is more likely to be treated as optional, delayed, or nice if it happens, while men's orgasm is treated like the natural endpoint. Recent research on sexual scripts argues that these scripts help explain differences in orgasm expectations and can be shifted by changing what partners prioritize, including making space for clitoral stimulation and women's orgasm. If you've ever felt that quiet imbalance where the encounter ends when he finishes and your body is left like an unfinished sentence, then you already understand why oral sex can become psychologically symbolic. It's not just stimulation, it's a statement that the script is changing, and the script does need changing because the orgasm gap is not a myth. Research continues to document enduring disparities in orgasm rates in heterosexual encounters, with socio-cultural norms and inadequate sex education cited among the contributors. When a man performs oral sex on his female partner, one psychological layer is simply this: he may be trying to close a gap that the culture quietly normalizes. He may not describe it that way, but his behavior can reflect a belief that her pleasure is not an accessory, it's part of the agreement. That brings you to the first major psychological type: the man who experiences giving pleasure as identity. For him, oral sex is less something he does and more proof of who he is. It's competence, it's attentiveness, it's pride that isn't loud, but steady. In at least one study looking at men's oral sex behavior through an evolutionary and relational lens, more motivation to sexually satisfy a female partner was linked to more frequent cunnilingus, and the authors frame oral sex as potentially functioning as part of mate retention, basically a way to invest in a partner and keep the bond strong. Read that carefully, because it's not saying men do this only to keep a woman from leaving. It's pointing to a deeper pattern. For many men, oral sex is connected to the psychology of maintaining closeness, security, and mutual satisfaction over time. Then there's the intimacy motive, which is different from the pleasure motive. Pleasure is about the outcome. Intimacy is about exposure. Oral sex requires closeness at a level that doesn't let you hide behind performance. You can't phone it in the same way. You're breathing the person, you're tasting them, you're close enough to notice tiny changes in tension and sound and rhythm. That closeness can feel deeply bonding for some couples, and research on oral sex and relationship quality has found associations between the frequency of husbands performing oral sex on wives and wives' reports of relationship satisfaction in older heterosexual couples. It's not proof of causation, and it won't apply to every couple, but it supports something many people know privately. When a partner invests in your pleasure, it can change how loved you feel outside the bedroom too. Now let's talk about the part people pretend isn't there: masculinity. Some men avoid oral sex because they're disgusted, anxious, or steeped in a sexual script that treats women's genitals as gross unless they're being used for male pleasure. That isn't just childishness, it's conditioning. There's also emerging research focusing specifically on men's engagement in cunnilingus and how it relates to masculinity beliefs, gendered attitudes, and sexual scripts. In plain language, some men are blocked not by desire, but by what the act symbolizes: submission, service, softness, or doing something that isn't centered on them. For those men, refusing oral sex can feel like protecting their status. For other men, performing it can feel like the opposite, proof they're secure enough that they don't need to posture. If you're watching this and you've ever felt the urge to frame it as humiliating for a man, notice what that belief is really saying. It's saying that caring about your partner's pleasure is lower. It's saying that giving is less masculine than taking. That belief doesn't come from biology, it comes from a hierarchy, and men who perform oral sex, especially consistently, especially without needing praise, can be psychologically distinct in one specific way. They're less governed by that hierarchy. They're more willing to make intimacy cooperative instead of competitive, but that doesn't mean every man who does it is emotionally evolved. There's another psychological type, the approval seeker. For him, oral sex can be a way to earn validation, avoid criticism, or feel irreplaceable. He may have learned that if he is exceptional in bed, he won't be abandoned, or he may fear being compared to past partners, or he may feel that his worth is tied to being good at sex, and oral sex becomes a performance where he can prove himself. The act looks generous, but the engine underneath it is anxiety. You can often tell the difference by what happens afterward. Does he feel connected and calm, or does he seem to scan for feedback like his self-esteem depends on it? Then there's the bargaining type, and this is where the psychology gets a little darker. Some men treat oral sex like currency. They give it expecting something back immediately, as if pleasure is a transaction. If it isn't repaid in the form they want, resentment builds. This is the version that turns a gift into leverage. And if you've ever felt pressured, if you've ever felt like you owe something because he did something for you, then you've been pulled into that transactional script. It's not intimacy, it's accounting. There's also a health and risk layer that shapes psychology in ways people don't always admit. Oral sex can transmit sexually transmitted infections. The CDC explicitly states that STIs can be spread through oral sex, and risk depends on the specific STI and sexual behaviors involved. So when a man performs oral sex, he's also making a trust decision whether he thinks about it consciously or not. In a committed, monogamous relationship with mutual testing, that trust can feel stable. In casual or non-exclusive contexts, it can become part of a risk negotiation that requires communication most people are bad at. Some men avoid oral sex partly because they overestimate risk or feel contamination anxiety. Others underestimate risk because they've absorbed the myth that oral sex is safe compared to other acts. The psychology often comes down to this: does he face reality and communicate, or does he hide behind denial and hope nothing happens? Now here's something personal, because this is where it hits the viewer, not the textbook. If you're a woman who wants oral sex and doesn't receive it, you don't only feel not satisfied, you often feel something sharper, like your pleasure is not worth the time, like your body is tolerated but not adored, like intimacy is happening around you, not with you. And if you're a man who avoids it without discussing why, your silence can be louder than your refusal, because the refusal can land as rejection of her body, even when it's really about your own discomfort, insecurity, or conditioning. And if you're a man who does perform oral sex, the most honest question isn't, what kind of man does that? The real question is, what is your motive in the dark when nobody is watching? Are you doing it because you want her to feel wanted? Because you genuinely enjoy giving? Because you feel proud of being attentive? Because it deepens the bond? Or are you doing it because you're afraid she'll leave? Because you need to be the best? Because you want leverage? Because you're trying to outrun your own insecurity? Oral sex, psychologically, can be a mirror. When it's healthy, it's often a sign of comfort with closeness, a willingness to learn, and a belief that her pleasure matters. When it's unhealthy, it can become a stage where insecurity performs generosity, where control disguises itself as giving, where the act is used as a tool to manage fear instead of building connection. So if you're listening and you want the darkest, simplest truth, it's this: a man performing oral sex on his female partner is not automatically enlightened or unique, but the way he approaches it can reveal whether his sexuality is built around mutuality or dominance, curiosity or entitlement, connection or transaction. And if you're the woman in the relationship, you're allowed to want what you want without shame. And you're allowed to pay attention to whether the person who touches you treats your pleasure like an inconvenience or like a responsibility he's honored to share. Because in the end, this isn't really about mouths and bodies. It's about whether intimacy in your relationship is a place where both people get to be fully human, or whether one person's satisfaction is treated like the ending and the other person's is treated like extra credit.